engineering,
medicine,
chemistry,
physics,
biology,
humanities, cardiology,
computing, public health, global
science communication.
Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell. In this edition, dealing with the global plastics problem, design and innovation are on the agenda. Also, in the month that's just seen World Mental Health Day, we hear from Imperial's mental health first aiders.
One of the things that I've noticed is this goes all the way from students up to staff in an academic context is the impostor syndrome, which is where you never quite feel that you're good enough to belong in the environment you're in. You're not as good as your peers, or at least you perceive it that way. And this is a big problem for undergraduates all the way up to professors.
And science communication at this university celebrates 25 years. 3 of our especially successful alumni gather to discuss the state of SciComm in an era of fake news and suspicion of the so-called experts.
The Imperial College Podcast.
OK then, let's jump in with some news. Hayley Dunning is here. Now Hayley, let's start with this. You've been reporting on some Imperial research into dealing with malaria by controlling populations of mosquitos.
Yeah, so this is one quite exciting potential new tool in the fight against malaria. So what a team here at Imperial has done is genetically modified one of the species of mosquito responsible for many of the malaria cases in sub-Saharan Africa. And they've made it so that the females are infertile. And so, to stress, this is just in labs at the moment, but the extra special thing they've done is that the gene that they've inserted into the female, they've made it be preferentially sort of inherited by the next generation. So this is a technique called gene drive, which means that the mutation that they've engineered into the gene that makes the female infertile will spread through a population. So they managed to do this in sort of caged populations of mosquitoes and crash the populations within 7 to 11 generations.
All right, well, we've heard about this gene drive technology before, but what's so significant about this particular research?
Yeah, well, for one thing, it's the first time that they've gotten these gene drives, this kind of biased inheritance, to work without being overcome by resistance. So you can imagine, obviously, infertility is not what the mosquitoes want to continue their species. So usually these sort of effects get selected out of the population. But in this case, they managed to overcome that by targeting a gene called double sex, which actually determines the sex of the insect itself. And that's such an important gene that the mosquitoes just can't get around the modifications they make to it. And it sounds pretty amazing, and it definitely is, but it also might sound scary to some people. But the team want to make sure everyone knows that this is at the moment only in caged experiments and just in labs. And there's many, many more studies that will be done before we ever think about releasing this, but that it would make a huge impact on malaria in these countries, especially in places where traditional methods like bed nets and spraying are just not working anymore.
Great, thank you very much for that, Hayley. Well, Kate Whiten is also here. And Kate, you've been looking into some incredible insights from human brain transplants. So what do we need to know?
Well, this is a group of scientists who've done something pretty incredible in that they've managed to grow human brain cells in a mouse brain. And they've used the human brain cells to model Down syndrome. And this is so important because researchers and scientists really struggled to know what's going on within our own brains because we can't access the brain. They're in our skulls, obviously, and you can't study the brain without harming a patient. So at the moment, we look at brains from post-mortem, so after someone's passed away, but that's not really how the brain works. So live brain cells are very different from dead brain cells. So what they've managed to do here is grow human brain cells from a skin cell, just from a healthy volunteer, and transplant those brain cells into a mouse brain and then watch how those human brain cells develop.
And in so doing, they've managed to gather some new insights into Down syndrome, haven't they?
Exactly right. So to make this brain, they took the skin cell from a person with Down syndrome, made those skin cells into brain cells and put them into this new brain model. And they've realised that the way the brain cells fire, their activity, is slightly different to what you'd expect in a brain of someone without Down syndrome. And that's given them something to look at in further work. But this model could also be used for lots of other brain conditions. So they could use it to look at dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, schizophrenia, so a real host of conditions.
All right, Kate, and just before we leave it, who's actually done this research?
So the work was done by a group of scientists. It was led by Imperial College London, and it was done in collaboration with a group from the University of Cambridge.
All right, Kate Whiten, thank you very much indeed for that. So that was our news update with Kate Whiten and Hayley Dunning. Well, a few weeks ago, around these parts, we had the Exhibition Road Day of Design, part of the London Design Festival, and it was where a whole load of businesses, museums and Imperial College hosted a day of workshops, discussions and talks about the marvels of Albertopolis, about design in general, and about sustainability. And when you talk about being kinder to the planet and what it means for design, then it's not long before you mention the P word. Yes, plastics. As part of the day, one of our recent undergraduates recorded a podcast. James Kung co-founded a startup to help tackle the global plastics problem, and he did so with two fellow Imperial College students. Now, James is here to tell me more. So, James, you've just graduated from physics.
Yes,
so
I have.
Well done, you.
Thank you very much.
No mean feat. And your startup is called Matter Ultrascience, isn't it?
Yes, we are, yeah.
So what do you do?
So, in short, what we do at Mataha Ultrascience is we develop cheap devices that allow an operator to quickly and conveniently identify plastics which might look the same but are chemically different. And we do this because you have to separate plastics, different types of plastic, before recycling them. And there currently really isn't a good low-cost solution. And that means that most places around the world recycle very little of their plastics. So our device hopefully addresses this problem.
Right, so that's the side of the problem that you're looking into, the sorting of plastics. So for this podcast that you recorded, so this was part of the Day of Design, you had a really long chat with somebody else who's active in this field, indeed has a startup of their own. This is Maria, isn't it?
Yes, Maria Kadletova. She's Slovakian and she's operations manager at a Slovakian startup called Crafting Plastics. They're a design studio. They make use of a newly developed biodegradable material that can be shaped and formed into many things, including fashion items, artwork, household objects, anything really. So they've got glasses and all sorts of things.
There is a lot of good things about plastics. I think we should start with that.
That is true, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, plastic is an amazing material. It helps us to, democratize a lot of products, make available to people at a cheaper price, Plastics really actually help us to move to the 21st century.
Yeah, it certainly
in a way.
improved our quality of life.
Yeah, and what's wrong with it? That it's the only problem that we are too good to work with plastics and we made it too durable.
And that is the whole point, isn't it? We are victims of our own success with plastic because its durability is what's made it such a kind of world-changing and really useful material. And now it's the whole problem that when we think about its effects on the planet. And you've got some figures, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. 330 million tons of plastic waste was produced last year. It's the equivalent of about 45,000 Eiffel Towers in mass, which is a huge, huge amount. And 90% of that was not recycled. That's 50 billion pounds sterling worth of plastic that just isn't recycled. And so much of that ends up in the ocean that some scientists estimate that by 2050 there will be more plastics than fish by mass.
For us landlubbers, it's effectively an invisible problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it really much is. And my startup, two of my co-founders, Hans and Martin, have recently been in Indonesia in a small island just east of Bali called Nusa Penida. And there they found that plastics from Nusa Penida actually find themselves washed up onto the north coast of Australia. And plastics to bring this close to home, plastics from the east coast of the United States actually end up in the UK. So this is really a global problem.
God, that's recycling for you, but in a very bad way, isn't it?
It is, very much so. You'll get American waste on British shores.
Yeah. And so coming back to your podcast interview and conversation with Maria Kadletova, Maria's company in Slovakia, well, that's working on so-called bioplastics.
Bioplastics can have certain properties. One of them is that it can be bio-based. It means that it can be based not only on oil, but it can have some part of renewable resources that is part of the material. But it doesn't have to be fully bio-based, so it can be called bioplastics even if there is only 10 or 20% of the bio-based content.
James, can you expand on that then? Just what do we need to know about bioplastics?
So bioplastics nowadays are used chiefly to replace single-use disposable things. So, for example, cups and forks and knives, cost and performance are still a problem as they don't meet temperature or durability requirements. So hopefully with the continued work of people like Crafting Plastics and their associated researchers, we can make more things with it.
And speaking of solutions, let's now get onto your prototype. And just to explain to the listeners, it looks like a large tablet computer because it does have a screen on, like a tablet-style screen. It's about shoebox size. There's what looks like a lamp that then faces down onto another assembly on the surface of the device that looks like a sensor. I'm sure you'll describe it much better than me. What are we looking at here?
So this is our low-cost, small-scale plastics identification instrument. It makes use of the scientific principle of near-infrared spectroscopy. Basically what it means is that we bounce light off a sample of plastic and we see what the light looks like once it comes back off, and then uploads it to some cloud servers that we have. And what we do on the cloud is we use machine learning algorithms to identify the plastic based on its spectra.
Because when you came in, you said, can I get on your Wi-Fi? And I thought, well, you've got a box of electronics there. Why do you need to get it online?
Exactly.
So that's the cloud bit. So you needed to plug it into the matrix to get the AI.
Exactly, into the matrix. So we use cloud-based identification because that means that we can do much more complicated things using much more powerful machines and then send the results back down.
So let's have a bit of a demo then, because you brought the machine. I'm going to prove it here just by giving it a tap. Let's throw some plastics at it then.
Yeah, in my hand here I've got two different bits of plastic. They're from yogurt cups. They're both white. I'm just going to pop it onto the sensor. Okay. And instantly that says it's polystyrene. And if you look at the bottom, it does say it's polystyrene, which is...
It's giving you a match, just like that. And
it has just given...
It's a little bit like just going to the supermarket and just scanning the barcodes and,
exactly.
When you do your self-checkout.
We're better than that in that you don't even need to scan a barcode. I mean, you just need to place it on and they'll go, okay, it's that piece of plastic.
And then you've got one more bit of plastic. This is fun. Do the fourth piece of plastic. Go on.
It's very fun. I expect this to be polypropylene as well, and yes, it is.
And the thing that you've patented is the sensor then, the thing
it's
that's
just
reading.
The sensor, yes.
Okay.
We use a mixture of off-the-shelf parts, custom fabricated PCBs, 3D printed bits, and some more magic inside the optical assembly.
Yeah, it's some magic that you can't tell us about.
Pixie dust
okay.
and baby's laughter.
Obviously, the two most important ingredients. But your idea is that this is proof of principle that you can make this technology cheaper than some of the commercially available plastic sorting machines.
Pretty much, yeah. So some of these industrial devices, they're machines. They've got big conveyor belts and air jets, and they do very, very fancy things, but they will cost around £500,000 to £1 million, whereas this particular device cost only £500 to build, and we can definitely get that down with economies of scale. So
yeah, of course.
In the end, we're looking at a £300 device that will sort plastic.
You obviously want to grow this into a full-on business, so where next?
So we've got one of our devices is currently still in Indonesia being tested by one of our collaborators down there. So with the feedback from that, we'll be working on the next 1 or 2 iterations of our prototype. After then, I guess the sky's the limit.
How can people find out more about what you're doing?
Sure, so we've got a website. We are www.matoha.com. That's MATOHA.com. You can also find us at email at hello@matoha.com or at Matoha Science. That's MATOHA Science on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So, James, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
No worries, James. And by the way, actually, you can hear the full podcast of James's conversation with Maria Kadletova on the White City Place podcast. So that'll be up quite soon. Just keep an eye on whitecityplace.com. Very easy to find. All right, well, now we're going to talk about mental health, and it certainly is an issue, as you might expect, in a competitive and high-achieving environment like a leading university, like Imperial College, for instance. Now, over here, we have mental health first aiders, one of whom is Caroline Brogan.
For both students and staff at Imperial, it can seem like our work is never done. The pressure and desire to achieve can affect everyone's mental health, but help is available. To mark this month's Mental Health Awareness Day, I spoke to Dr. Becky Bell and Dr. Cedric John to get some tips on imposter syndrome, work-life balance and self-care.
One of the things that I've noticed is this goes all the way from students up to staff in an academic context is the impostor syndrome, which is where you never quite feel like you're good enough to belong in the environment you're in. You're not as good as your peers, or at least you perceive it that way. And this is a big problem for undergraduates all the way up to professors. Certainly at the undergraduate level, I think a lot of that impostor syndrome sometimes comes from the fact that they've come from schools where they've been the top of their class, they've always got the best marks. Suddenly they're then in a cohort of 70, maybe over 100 students who are all as good as them. They've all got the same grades, and that can be quite difficult. But sometimes it's just that feeling that you're not good enough, which can really hold you back.
Sometimes the problem is also that students in particular, but also probably we do as colleagues, look at what the other students are doing or what our colleagues are doing, and what they do always seems so much better. So we are putting on ourselves that stress of trying to do as well or to belong and be able to essentially do as well and achieve.
Yeah, so I went to university at Oxford. That's where I did my undergraduate degree in earth sciences. And I can remember there was a little group of perhaps about 10 of us who were all very studious. We all wanted to do really well. And we got ourselves into a nasty little loop of, seeing how much work one person was doing, and the rest of the group had to at least do as much as that or exceed it. And in the end, it involved, all of us staying in the library till 2 a.m. sometimes. It was just not helpful, not productive.
And of course, sleep is an important thing when it comes to good mental health. So
absolutely, that behaviour was completely not productive.
You mentioned staying in the library till 2 a.m. Do you think there's an issue in academia with the work-life balance as well?
So our work becomes our life. If you have a family, for instance, you have that double strain where you have to be there for the family and you have to be there for the work. So the work-life balance is an issue, but not necessarily because people are not good at managing it, but it's because academia, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle.
As an academic, your job is never done. I've had to come to the realization that you can't work all the time. You have to make time for the other things in your life.
So when that time comes, how do you switch off?
I find that one of the best ways for me to switch off anyway is to actually be active and do some exercise. I really love just to at least carve at least an hour a day to sit on the sofa and watch TV. That's almost kind of when I set my reset button.
Academia is not a job, but really it's a vocation. You tend to think about your job all the time, That's good to a point, but there are points also where you have to say, right, that's enough, I disconnect.
You're both mental health first aiders. How has that influenced your approach to work and mental health in general, and maybe even your home life?
One of the things that you learn when you do the mental health first aiders course is to be non-judgmental. That's a cornerstone of the training. And when you're away from home, effectively you recreate a family cell. And so you will have students who feel homesick or students who have a range of different issues. So you have to learn to be patient. You have to learn to listen, to truly listen, not just to try to give advice.
Our job is to listen non-judgmentally, as Cedric said, give some information about the resources available. But what I really liked from the course is that they encourage you to encourage the person with the mental health issues to seek help and also to do self-help. So to take exercise and do things that make you happy. Having the training to reassure you that it's not all about counselling and having the answers. That's not what it's about at all. It's about encouraging people to get the right help.
People who have gone through the training have a special lanyard. It's a green lanyard that says Mental Health First Aid England. You can approach these persons and just start the conversation and say you would like to talk about mental health. And I think it's fair to say that the mental health first aiders are trained to listen to you. They can also probably point you to a closer source of help if you're not from the same departments. So they will be able to at least flag you to the right direction for help.
What I would say to students is don't be afraid to ask for help.
Some great tips there from Cedric and Becky. We mental health first aiders are the ones with the green lanyards. You cannot miss us. So don't be shy, do stop us for a chat.
Yes, please do, and do remember to look out for Caroline and her mental health first aider colleagues. That is Caroline Brogan. Well, finally, a bright, sunny day at the end of September was a big day for several hundred alumni who gathered here at Imperial. It was a reunion, for sure, but also a day for some really serious questions and definitely some lively discussion. This was the celebration of the 25th cohort of Imperial's Science Communication MSc. I did the course myself, and now I teach on it. Well, the day itself kicked off with a panel in the Great Hall called Big Questions, any answers. Against a backdrop of fake news, suspicion of so-called experts, and the rise of populism in many parts of the world, where does that leave today's science communicators? On that panel were Juliette Muthu of the African Academy of Sciences, Sophia Collins, who's director of Parenting Science Gang, and also journalist and now Wellcome Engagement Fellow Alok Jahar. Now, Hilary Geit is currently studying science communication over here as one of our 2-year part-time students. She has a long background in public health, but she's also taken up journalism and podcasting. So who better to start the conversation after that opening panel by asking Alok Jahar what he took away from the discussion.
What I think was really interesting was people are concerned about audiences and how you get to underserved audiences. We all talk about this in professional contexts and circles all the time. How do you get to new audiences? How do you build your audience? Some do it from commercial points of view. We want to have more people reading or buying our newspaper. Others do it for more sort of altruistic reasons. But there's a group over there that doesn't access science. It's being hoodwinked by terrible medical cures and things. How do we get to them? So audiences for me are really important, and I think we as media professionals can do much, much more to understand those audiences. And I don't mean, by the way, focus groups and surveys and things. I mean actually understanding the needs, the desires, the things that people need to know to make their lives better, and then working out how you, as a professional of whatever sort of stripe, whether you're a journalist, a communicator or whatever, how you can then contribute to that. That was something that I'm really interested in for the rest of today, and I've sort of been sparked by from this session as well.
That's fantastic. Sophia. Hi. Well, I think, to return to Alok's question about audiences, I guess the projects that I run are all about giving your audiences the chance to set the agenda themselves and come up with their own questions, and then you don't have to understand where they're coming from or what they want, but also you've got to just sort of ask them all the time. So the project that I run, it's with parents of small children, and we at first we were arranging like online Q&As with experts, and at first we were having these at 8:00 in the evening. Hardly anyone was logging in and coming to them, and so we did sort of threads in the group and polls in the group saying, like, well, why aren't you coming to these? And everybody basically said, because my children are still awake. Like if you look in the baby books, it would say that everyone's babies are asleep by this time, but like actually for most people they were still trying to get their kids to sleep. And so we moved them to 9:00, and suddenly we got 5 times as many people coming. And so we didn't get that right to start with, whereas I guess you're in a different situation as a journalist, that your audience aren't there in a room with you, for you to ask kind of thing,
No, the one thing you say as a journalist, and any journalist in this room will say, is that I'm writing stuff for my audience. That's what you do. You know your audience, and I don't think that I've ever met my audience, and I don't think I've ever spoken to them. Apart from people like my mum who read maybe some articles and things. So, and I mean that seriously. I don't know who these people are, and so I've got an intuition as to what's good, and I think we've got science journalists pretty good intuitions. And we make good things, we find out good things, and there should always be that element of expertise that we have, which is to find stories and surprise and delight people with them. But we don't do enough of finding out what our audiences and also new audiences do. And I'm not suggesting that that's going to somehow transform journalism. I'm just saying that we don't do any of it. We should do some of it and improve it.
So, Juliette, you have such a massive and varied audience. Do you want to pick up on that thread?
Yeah, so for us it's an African audience, and I must say that there is something as an African audience, and there's also nothing as an African audience. It's you target your messages to the groupings of people that you want to be able to communicate to, whether it's policymakers, members of the media, the journalists themselves. How do you want them to communicate? But I think one of the things that we're beginning to do a lot more now is think through our communication strategies. Sophia has talked to the audiences, the channels that you use. If we're going to use, say, a press release, what are the key messages you want to be able to communicate? What's the overall message you want people to be able to grasp from a particular scientific paper that was published recently? How's that going to affect the audience that you're targeting? So I think it's thinking through that and getting the communication personnel to really be strategic in how they think, and also not to just churn out papers that are being published by the scientists. There's a lot of evidence, but is it all useful? Is it information that needs to be communicated? No, everything needs to be communicated.
That's Juliette Muthu talking to Hilary Geit as part of that Alumni Day, that celebration of 25 years of science communication here at Imperial College. You also heard in that piece from Sophia Collins and Alok Jahar. And that brings this edition of the podcast to a close. Just a few quick reminders. And I know I always say this, but it's always worth reminding you. If you want to stay in touch with what's going on around the college, then you can do so via our news website. That's imperial.ac.uk/news. And we have a Twitter handle, @ImperialSpark, is a very good way of staying across the gossip. Let's just put it like that. I am Science Communication, MSc graduate, alumni, call me what you will, Gareth Mitchell, and I'll be back with more next time. See you then. Bye-bye.